Hello watch enthusiasts! Now it's come that time of the month when I'd like to talk about those interesting new releases from the past month, and indeed anything to look forward to into the future in terms of pieces to be released. And this month I have quite a few interesting pieces, along with a piece of news about the watch industry as a whole, which I felt it would be appropriate to share. And we certainly have quite an interesting variety of this month, with everything from interesting new quartz Grand Seikos, all the way to new versions of the Blancpain, Villeret, Quantieme, Complet GMT, in addition to a new version of the Heuer Autavia, which is always welcome really with this new design, which I think works extremely well to combine modern and indeed old-fashioned aspects together to form a really wonderful package. And today's picture from the watch guys, I have this beautiful picture of this tremendous Seamaster 300 with that limited edition blue dial in different hands, which you can no longer get hold of, but certainly is a wonderful piece and an interesting variation on the Seamaster 300 style, which we've found out is likely to be discontinued, which is a real shame, but is nonetheless, while you can still get hold of one of these, a beautiful, beautiful watch. And for those who are interested, the Watch Guys is my group on Snups, which is a social media platform where you can share pictures of your collections and interests, and where I'm happy to reply to any questions or inquiries you happen to have, and where you can ask questions to other viewers and enthusiasts. If you would like to join, then simply follow the link down below to be able to access these additional features to really make the most of the channel. Now the first piece I'd like to talk about is about Helmut Sinn. And Helmut Sinn founded Sinn in the 1960s, and ran it until 1994 when it was passed on to Lothar Schmidt from IWC. And this was a brand based upon the concepts that Helmut Sinn saw in watches as a blind flying instructor. And in the 1960s he found there weren't any watches which fitted the specifications and requirements that were particularly required for flying by instruments, blind, and so as a result founded his own company. And this brand, I feel, has moved pilot's watches on in a way which no other has to the present day, whilst brands such as Breguet, for example, have had a major impact, indeed Dodin and other manufacturers like that. I feel that Sinn have had the most enormous impact in terms of being present throughout the years and being accessible to the vast majority of pilots in terms of providing high-quality and well-made pilot's watches at an affordable price. And at the age of 101, Helmut Sinn has passed away just a few weeks ago, and so as a result, I felt it was appropriate to show certain recognition for the creator of one of the most phenomenal pilot's watch brands ever to really be produced, and indeed one of the ones which have remained so true to their original purpose of providing true instruments to pilots. Now, speaking of another horological legend, in terms of quartz watches and luxury quartz watches, I think the first brand to spring to mind is Grand Seiko. And Grand Seiko have had an interesting history because they provide something extremely different to what the Swiss watchmakers provide, and in many ways provide something different and potentially superior technologically in certain instances. But what one certainly has to remember with this brand is their use of the quartz movement. And they really have used the full spectrum with everything from quartz to spring drives to full-on automatic movements. But in any of these fields, they go the whole hog in terms of execution and are extremely careful to produce really wonderful pieces, which show the best of each technology without using them simply to save money, in a similar way to, for example, the Rolex Oyster quartzes produced at the end of the last century. And whilst the caliber 9581 was the sort of original genesis moment for Grand Seiko as far as their quartz movements go, the 9F83 and the 9F series as a whole have become the backbone of their quartz movements. And these movements are beautifully decorated all-metal quartz pieces, which are accurate to about 10 seconds a year, which is a baffling sort of accuracy by comparison to mechanical movements, especially of the day, when these were originally released in 1993. And I think there is a hypocrisy in the world of horology with regards to quartz movements, and indeed them being seen as inferior. But the 9F has been a movement which has been now present for 25 years, and has provided a wonderful backbone for these watches, with fantastic execution with a 9-jewel build. And these really are movements that can be serviced and will last as long as, if not longer than, a mechanical movement, which is a fantastic thing to see, and does defend the quartz movement as being more than simply a disposable timekeeper. And so, as a result of this 25th anniversary, 2 new versions have been released, which pay homage to the original 9F83 from 1993. Now, the first of these watches is being released in a limited edition of 1,500 pieces for a price of $3,400 US. And this is the SBGT 241, and this is a very close copy of the original model from 1993, with a 39.1mm stainless steel case with both these brushed and polished finishes, with wonderful bevels down the case, and a very curved style which isn't typical Grand Seiko in its usual form, but is much closer to this original 90s design, and actually these curves are far more in keeping with that 90s style. And as you will have seen from the other photographs, it's very similar to the original with that semi-beads of rice bracelet, as well as the polished bezel, the rather interesting design, and that wonderful white dial. And this piece is in full stainless steel, but is of course polished and finished in a way which can only really be found from Grand Seiko, with that wonderful style of polishing on their cases, as well as extremely fine brushing. And you also have drilled lugs, which allows you to change the bracelet much more quickly. But the dial itself is a wonderful piece with these markings on its entirety, which weren't seen on the original but add texture and detail to this simple design. Likewise, it has a day-date cutout which is nicely framed, and a beautiful level of finishing on the sharply beveled hands, which appear like swords in this Dauphine style. This is of course carried onto the Grand Seiko logo, which is now only Grand Seiko rather than Seiko and Grand Seiko as on the original. And that little golden star at 6 o'clock symbolises the 5-second-a-year accuracy this watch now has. Internally, this watch is very, very similar to the original, with a caliber 9F83, which gives exactly the same complications, albeit it has been refined over the years, but is fundamentally the same movement. And this is a wonderful heritage to be able to carry over to a modern timepiece, and does show such a wonderful demonstration of just what a quartz movement can be in a luxury timepiece. And this watch doesn't feature an exhibition caseback as with the original, but you do know that the interior of this watch has been finished to the highest quality, and really is as good as a quartz movement will ever get. Now, whilst I feel the full stainless steel model will be an immediate hit with the collectors, this second version, which is the SBG V238, is a piece which I think will be more of an acquired taste. And this model comes in a two-tone variant and is limited to 600 pieces rather than the 1500 of the other version. And this features a case which is far more in line with watches from the 50s and 60s from Grand Seiko, rather than the more 90s curved design of the other. The case is also in a design which is often seen in the Grand Seiko line, and in many ways is less individual, but in some ways more characterised by the general direction the brand has taken, and in that way more iconic. Now, this piece is more expensive at $4,800, and as a result does feature additional features such as that gold bezel, in addition to the gold accents on the dial. It does, for the sake of simplicity, lose the day-date complication in favour of a simple date, and the movement is a spin-off of the original, the 9F82, which is that version with that other version of the date, which has that simplification. In keeping with the sharper, more angular lines of this watch, it loses the beads of rice bracelet in favour of one of their own, which is also beautifully finished and is a traditional 3-link bracelet, in a sort of oyster-esque style, albeit with beveled edges, and a wonderful combination of polishing and brushing on different levels to really provide a multifaceted experience to this quartz movement. Furthermore, the watch does now feature an exhibition caseback, which I think is interesting and something very different in this 40mm stainless steel case. And the exhibition caseback provides you with a wonderful view of the gilded surface to this movement, which doesn't try to hide its quartz nature, but rather glorifies it as a phenomenal demonstration of technology, as far as true accuracy goes in a luxury timepiece, in a way which has been abandoned by brands like Rolex, for example, and even Omega don't invest in their quartz segment in the same way, but rather Omega, for example, regards it as a lower section of their branding, whereas Grand Seiko, I feel, celebrate this, and show it as simply a different way of approaching horology. And so this piece will no doubt be a real hit as well, albeit not quite as similar to the original as the larger edition version. The next watch I'd like to talk about is another version of the new Heuer Autavia. And the Autavia is a fantastic watch in my eyes, and actually a really fantastic addition to the line of watches on the market as far as driving chronographs and pilots' chronographs go, with an in-house calibre, a very, very clean design and aesthetic, and in my eyes a great deal of functionality. However, returning to the roots of the Heuer Autavia, which was a real legend in its day, one of the most legendary models and pieces ever to be released was the reference 1163, which was, with its white dial and panda style of arrangement, as well as blue accents, known as the Joe Siffert. And this was because the very famous Swiss racing driver was known for wearing one of these, and as a result this particular model became legendary, really, with regards to his ownership of this timepiece. And though it was a much later reference than the one which this particular Heuer is based on, Heuer have worked with Caliber 11, which is a site that is designed to bring news about new and old Heuer watches. And as a result, they work together, and this watch is actually only available from them. And this is a piece which is a collaboration, which now features this panda dial, as well as these blue accents on the indices and the second hand. And I think this is without a doubt my favourite execution of the Heuer Autavia so far. Now, structurally, this watch is very, very similar to the standard version of this re-edition of the Heuer Autavia, with its Heuer Caliber 02 automatic chronograph movement, which is in-house, in addition to the 42mm fully polished case, which is 15.6mm thick. However, this watch does feature a few marked differences. Notably, the bezel is now a combined timing and GMT bezel. And this may appear more cluttered at first, but I feel does add a great deal of functionality by having both of these scales on it, and of course is bidirectional to allow you to use it to set a different time zone, time hours, or time minutes, which adds a great deal of functionality in addition to the chronograph function. And what I think I love about this design is that it extends the meaning of this watch, because it adds both this sort of racing heritage to the watch, which is characterised by the Joe Siffert signature, which is printed onto the inside of the exhibition caseback, which again adds to the exclusivity of this watch, as well as its very unique dial with that wonderful Heuer and Autavia branding on it. But then one also has the lack of aged lume, which I think was a very good choice with this watch to give it a more clean contemporary design, but with the soupçon of a more classic style, with the connotations to Formula 1 racing and indeed other forms of racing, which this watch has. Now, one notable change to this watch, which I think is important, is they've genuinely refined the design of the watch. Because there were a lot of criticisms, and I must say I was one of the people to mention this to various people that I didn't like about the original version, was that this watch had 2.5-minute increments on its its minute counter for the chronograph. And I found this was contrary to the design of the watch as far as being a legible chronograph, because it is irritating to have graduations which aren't in keeping with the actual timing functions of the watch. Now, this has been rectified with this timepiece with more graduations, giving you a 1-minute count of the chronograph minutes, which is a very, very welcome change in my eyes, and I think a lot of people will appreciate that with this watch. The only real shame with this watch, and I must admit is a shame, is the fact that it's a limited edition of 100 pieces only, and as a result won't be widely accessible or available. And it costs 5,600 Swiss francs per model. I've given the price in Swiss francs just because that's a more accurate measurement of the price than converting it. But I do think this is still a notable model, and I think one that will be very collectible in future, as far as a really beautiful re-edition. And the irony of this watch is, of course, that in truth this is the first Joe Siffert Autavia, because this is the first official one from Heuer. Now, the following watches do move up in price, and these are pieces which caught my eye last month, but I haven't had the opportunity in a video to show them yet. But I'm keen to show them because they offer something which I saw last year in the Veneziana model of the Omega Seamaster, which was really a glorified reproduction of the older Seamasters from between the 1940s and 60s, during which time the Seamaster was very much a timepiece to be worn as a dress watch, but one which was slightly more robust than one would expect, as a sort of a counterpart to something like a Rolex Oyster Perpetual. And this is a watch which takes direct inspiration from that, whilst taking hints from Omega's history. And this piece in fact coincides with the Olympic Games. This is the Omega Seamaster Olympic Games Gold Collection, and are designed to symbolise the medals, but I feel these watches actually symbolise far more than that, and are watches which I'd love to see in Omega's standard range, because they are something lacking in my personal opinion from their range. And these come in the 3 colours of gold, so yellow gold, Sedna gold in terms of that rose gold sort of colour, and then white Canopus gold, which is the most expensive at $18,900 whilst the other 2 versions are $17,300. And these watches feature hints of other Seamasters. For example, they feature the twisted lyre style of lugs, which are seen on the professional line of Omegas. But in addition to that, they have a very large style of enamel dial with a wonderful old-fashioned printed Omega symbol at 12 o'clock, and simply Seamaster and Swiss made, lending to an extremely clean aesthetic with a very small pumpkin style of crown on the side, which just adds to that old-fashioned, yet that contemporary in terms of finishing, style of timepiece. This is combined with leaf-style hands and these wonderful dagger indices around the dial to give it a simple yet highly characterful aesthetic in any of the versions, in either the brighter golds or the white. The sizing of these watches, however, is rather contemporary at 39.5mm, though in terms of the way they look, with their delicate lugs and small crown, they are made to look larger than they actually are on the wrist, which is an interesting characteristic. and they do feature very, very different proportions to something which is probably the nearest thing in the Seamaster range itself, being the Aquaterra, which really is far more sporty a timepiece. And these pieces are also joined in the range by the platinum version at $37,800 with a black dial, though I feel the gold ones can contribute to producing the primary part of this collection. And internally, these watches do follow Omega's new line of movements with the 8807 master coaxial chronometer, which is their highly accurate new range of in-house movements, which do add a certain thickness to watches. But I think these days they really have honed the technology to a point where actually they're very, very well designed, and I think do constitute the future of the Omega Seamaster range. The movement itself is beautifully finished actually, and does give a wonderful view of the mechanisation of this watch. It does also feature a few details which are different to the usual ones we see in steel-cased watches, notably a rose gold rotor and balance bridge, which does give a certain complexity and decoration to an otherwise very elegant movement in my eyes. And whilst these watches are limited runs and as a result are rather costly, which is difficult to deny when you can get hold of a vintage Constellation in absolutely mint condition with the incredible 550 calibre in them for really a third of this price in solid gold, I must admit that the price of these watches is of course high. But irrespective of that, I think these do show a wonderful direction that I think Omega really could benefit from following. So I think there really would be a market for these watches if they chose to make these as conventional pieces in their range. Now the final watch I'd like to talk about is from one of Blancpain's most successful collections. And in truth, Blancpain are known more generally for their dress watches than indeed for example, the 50 Fathoms in the form of their sports watch. And these are watches in the Villeret Quantieme Complet GMT range. And this is a watch which is based on their complete calendar model, but that model was updated to feature the new underlug correctors, and this allowed you to be able to adjust the calendar far more quickly and easily, which was something that was really required in these watches, and they finally made that change to the GMT model. And the GMT model is an interesting piece because it has the paradox of at base being a very simple and elegant dress watch, onto which they've placed all of this additional complexity of having a complete calendar with the day of the week, the date, as well as the month, and now a GMT function, as well as the moon phase. And this watch is a beautiful example of what a dress watch can be, with two versions being available in a very conventional size of 40mm by 11.8mm. And there are two versions I've said, so there's a red gold version with an opaline dial, which presumably will be the more expensive, though prices haven't been released. And the dial features these wonderful different levels, which are very subtle and carefully done, but I think add together to make a neutral watch in its aesthetic, with that curved style of pointer date, which I think is wonderful to look at. In addition to this, there is a stainless steel model with the same fully polished case and stepped bezel. However, the design of this watch is more sedate perhaps, and more clean and clear, bearing in mind that silver is the predominant colour, rather than having those gilded sections, and this is seen throughout from the hands to the indices, obviously to the case, as well as to the colour of the strap in black rather than brown. Furthermore, the moon phase no longer features the golden moon, but rather now a silver moon, and the whole design appears far more classical. And the dial of this watch also has a more silvery effect, rather than the opaline style on the gold model. And both versions are available with a bracelet, and I must say I do like the look of the bracelet, which is this very, very finely designed bracelet in this mesh style with larger outer links to really frame it wonderfully. And whilst usually I find bracelets on dress watches somewhat irksome because one normally wears them whilst writing or sitting at a desk, I think on this watch it works extremely well to balance that aesthetic, and especially on the steel version to make it extend out around the wrist and give it an air of classic charm with a certain touch and twist which is a bit different to what you would normally see. Through the back of the watch it's possible to see beneath the lugs those correctors for indeed those functions inside the movement. And this of course allows a much quicker and easier changing of these aspects without the need for an additional tool. And this watch of course features the calibre 67A5, which does feature these hours, minutes, month, the day, date and the moon phase, as well as a GMT function, which is a great deal to get out of this 28 dual movement, which is of course adjusted to 6 positions and features all the decoration you would expect, with a wonderfully finished gold rotor, as well as decoration throughout, which is of course what you would expect on one of these watches, but is still wonderful to see, and I think something which provides an aesthetic which is typically Blancpain, which is very sedate, very well contained, and reasonable in its design, but nonetheless shows a craftsmanship and care which really is of this luxury brand, and is to be expected from such a big name, and indeed one of the oldest brands there are. Now I'll conclude the video here, but do leave your comments down below as to what you thought of these watches, and indeed, bearing in mind a lot of these are limited editions, which ones you think that should be made outside those limited editions as standard production models. Now, as per request, I have changed the end of my video somewhat, due to those who have been in the armed forces commenting on my ending, which is quite right. I have made a mistake all this time. So thank you very much for watching, and if you did enjoy the video, then please do like, share, and subscribe to help the channel, and enjoy more content here in the future. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, out.